Again, welcome everyone to today's Grantee Business Engagement Bootcamp Kickoff Webinar. And I'm going to turn things over to your moderator today, Gina Wells. She's the Project Director with the Apprenticeship State Expansion TA with Mayor and Mayor. Gina, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be with you this afternoon. Have to let you know that I am not wearing any pearls as part of my work at home aesthetic. And I hope you are also someplace comfortable where you can, join us in this hour to really dig into the kickoff to our business engagement bootcamp. I can see everybody logging in. I can see everybody chiming in with their name and where they are. I think that's great. It gives you all a chance to see who is going to be joining in this bootcamp experience with you. If you haven't put in the state you're in, it'd be great to just chime in so folks can locate you if they're not familiar with your county. We've got a jam-packed hour to spend together, so I am going to dive right in. There's going to be a lot of chance for question and answer and good opportunities to engage with the 3 business engagement coaches that are joining us in this technical assistance experience today. And I just want to acknowledge right off the bat, the world of business engagement and apprenticeship looks a little different today than it did when you were registering for this boot camp. We're going to adapt right along with you. We'll spend a little time talking about that new reality today, and your boot camp coaches are ready to really explore what that means on the ground with you in your coaching sessions, if that's where you want to go with those conversations. So we'll do some introductions. We'll just do a little bit of logistics overview. We'll really dive into the business engagement skills. We'll take some questions and then we'll wrap up. And I do want to say, you all are not muted right now on the line. So go ahead, look at your phone right now. If your mute button isn't pushed, go ahead and push that mute button, and that will help us a lot. And then Laura, I can see maybe a couple of people might need that dial-in reminder again in our chat. So if you can go ahead and do that, that would be great. So just you've seen over here on the welcome chat who's here, but now you can also look on the map. You can see that there's a great group of people from all over the country participating in our boot camp together. So, when the going gets tough with the boot camp, know that you've got folks who are out there doing new things, tackling new skills, taking new approaches to business engagement right alongside you. We're really thrilled to be working with all of you. Let me just give you a quick overview of the boot camp, just a reminder. So the goal of this boot camp is that it's really skills-based. The idea is that we're going to be giving you some tips, techniques, approaches, skills that you can use starting today as an apprenticeship business consultant. Like I said, these skills work whether we're in a full employment economy, a high unemployment economy. We're going to be talking about the strategies and skills that you can use today and into the future in your work. There's 3 phases of the boot camp. There's today's training where we really drill down on skills. There's 2 coaching calls, and we'll talk about registering for those if you haven't done it already. And then there's the 3rd element, which is you. So we have built some time in between your 2 coaching calls on purpose. Your coach is going to give you some homework. It's nothing theoretical. You'll be talking about specific challenges you want to tackle, specific goals that you have. At the end of your first coaching call, your coach is going to give you a couple of things that you can do in between your 2 calls, test out some of the approaches you've been talking about, some of the skills we might have covered, take some action steps that can lead you towards your goals. And then on your second boot camp call, you'll be able to talk about how that felt, what worked well, what you still want to refine, other strategies that can help you along the way. So those 3 phases. I am joined in supporting you all in this effort today by my colleague, Laylee Oliver, and she's available to answer any questions you have about sort of connecting and navigating our boot camp process. So if you have any questions logistically or in relation to how to connect with everything, just reach right out to her. Her email is right there. So again, sign up for those coaching calls. You should have received several emails from me. Each of those emails have links that you follow that take you to a website that allows you to snag the time that works best for you with your coach. So if you haven't done that yet, and there are a few of you who haven't, please go ahead and do that either right now or as soon as our call ends so that you can get those on your calendar. And we're tracking that, so we'll reach out to you. A couple boot camp rules just to keep us moving today. We want this to be fun and engaging for you. you're going to get out of this boot camp what you put into it. So please, you know, be honest with your coach, share your goals, share your challenges, ask questions today. Really engage with this material, make it your own. You know, let us know what you're trying to do so that we can shape the skills and approaches to best suit what you've got in front of you and what you hope to accomplish working with your businesses today. All right, I want to introduce you to our coaches. So we're joined today by the 3 coaches who'll be working with all of you. Each of you has been assigned one based on the challenges that you shared with us when you submitted your registration. So Jerry Ghazi, Susan Muha, and Wendy Brors. Each of these 3 fantastic people is very seasoned in the space of working with business, working to advance apprenticeship. Jerry's been doing this work all across the country in many sectors as part of his work that he does with Vermont High Tech and his other businesses. Susan Muha, former community college president and longtime coach of Apprenticeship State Expansion Grantees. Wendy Brors from the private sector and working with us for many years on apprenticeship expansion. So we just know you're going to learn a lot from them and really enjoy hearing from them and working with them. And we're going to hear a lot more from them in just a few minutes. Before we do that, I want to hear from you, and I really want us to think about today's reality. So when you registered for the Business Engagement Bootcamp, we asked you to tell us, you know, what are some of the challenges you're facing? What are some of the business engagement goals you have in front of you? What are some things that are not working for you in business engagement? And you all were fantastic. You were really clear with us about what was in front of you, but maybe your challenges are a little bit different. So couple ways we can do this. You could unmute your line if you want to chat with us. You can put some things into the welcome chat over here, and I'll pull a few nuggets out. But we just want to think, how are current events impacting your business engagement work? How is your work looking a little different? And if there's been like a little shift in what you might want to tackle during the boot camp, tell us about that. We would love to hear from you. Again, you can hit *6 to unmute your line. Yep, is that someone there who wants to go ahead? Not hearing anybody, but seeing a lot of people typing in, so that's excellent. While we're doing that, maybe I want to toss it over to Jerry. Jerry, can you tell us a little bit about how the work you're doing with your current apprenticeship sponsors has shifted a little bit in the last few weeks?
Yes, thank you. And again, Jerry Ghazi, president, founder of the Institute for American Apprenticeships in Vermont High Tech. Been around for about 20 years doing apprenticeships, registered apprenticeships in the non-traditional fields of healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing, and business services. And been doing for the last 4 years work across the entire country with organizations and employers that are national based or very local based. And what you're seeing constantly across the board is, for those that are really involved with COVID-19, are essential employers, they want to know, how can we actually abide by our state laws, et cetera, for this 6 feet of separation. And so we're working a lot closer with these individual employers to look at their RTI schedules, that's the related technical instruction, and their on-the-job learning work processes to actually convert them to be virtual. So we're spending a lot of time and effort helping employers continue their apprenticeship within the current structure with the current employees, but yet changing the way it gets delivered. And that's one of the key things we've been doing across the country. Another key aspect that we've been truly focusing on is those that are affected by this downturn, that are furloughing employers, how to keep those employees engaged with the process, how to keep them, if they're furloughed, how to keep them as apprentices engaged in either RTI or OJL processes, even though they're no longer working full-time for that employer. And so those are the 2 key areas that we're seeing. And the business engagement, it's really about helping individuals solve pain points and getting them prepared for when the turnaround does happen. How could they use apprenticeship to either reskill the individuals coming back, because work will be different when folks return back, and also how to actually look at new people coming in, because many people will have switched chairs, so to speak. They'll have left one employer, maybe gone to another, and how to really start upskilling that new workforce that an employer will be faced with.
That's great. Jerry, thank you so much for giving us some of that context about what you're seeing in your work. And we're starting to see some comments roll in, wide range of comments. I hope that you can see over here in the welcome chat. You know, Brenda sharing that employers are just triaging their current situation. How are they going to stay in business? You know, some folks are pivoting to the response to COVID-19 and the unemployment and workforce challenges that are out there. And yet in other spaces, we're seeing, you know, ongoing work. Oregon's talking about their tech apprenticeship programs and continuing to expand in that tech space, getting those employers to engage when they're not sure about apprenticeship. Rebecca talking about getting a message out of using this time to prepare for the bounce back and the economic recovery and how to use apprenticeship to do that. The changing business outreach model, because our boots are not on the ground, our boots are under our desk or up on our couches. You know, several other folks, Roy talking about that shift to UI, Brenda talking about, you know, the fact that there's upskilling happening or opportunities for upskilling, opportunities for business to think about, you know, what's in their value chain and how they can strengthen that. We were just on a call with South Carolina a couple days ago where they talked about shifting their business engagement strategy. They are now using some of the techniques we're going to talk about today, really scanning real-time labor market information all across the state, looking for any business that is clearly hiring right now in an apprenticeable occupation so that they can talk about how their apprenticeship resources can help that business thrive in this economy. Brenda talking about using the word apprenticeship a little less, using the word upskilling a little more. It's good to adapt our language to sort of what's happening out there. And I can see that a few of you are still typing in, and I'm gonna keep us moving, but we will come back to some of the comments that you're putting in here. I think it's really important for us to think about the work that you're doing right now and how the skills we're going to be talking about in this boot camp can serve you both now and into the future as our economy continues to change, as we move towards you know, recovery from where we are. Melissa Stark talking a little bit about concerns about as you know, what happens to our vulnerable populations in this economy and how to use apprenticeships to lift them up in these times. It's a great idea, Melissa. Glad to see that you're thinking about that. John asking about if we can put up a link to sign up for the coaching calls. It doesn't quite work like that, John, but in your email, I will shoot an email out to everyone who hasn't signed up for coaching calls. Make sure you can click on the custom links that are there for you to register for that. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving, but again, we'll loop back to these great comments. Thank you so much for participating. I want to sort of move into the skills training and, you know, idea training portion of our presentation today. So when we talk about business engagement for apprenticeship, we like to bring some mindsets into that work. So some of the underlying foundational ideas that drive the types of business engagement strategies that really seem to work. And there's sort of three of them. So one is that apprenticeship is a workforce development tool. And that's in contrast to the idea that that apprenticeship is something that we sell or that we're out to business kind of selling the benefits of apprenticeship to them. Those activities definitely have their place, but to increase your efficiency and really maximize the quality of your engagements, you want to take a consultative approach and think of apprenticeship as a solution, as a tool to pain points and challenges that employers are having. We'll talk about how to do that. Another really important mindset is that apprenticeship is not something different from what business does now. It is a formalized approach to what businesses already do that ensures them more repeatable and better results. And Jerry's going to talk a little bit more about what this mindset means to him and how he puts it into practice. And then the last mindset is that your apprenticeship pitch, your conversations with business are only as good as the program that you can deliver. So you may be excellent at talking with businesses, crafting solutions, engaging them and getting them connected to the registered apprenticeship process. But if you don't have the partnerships behind you to deliver on the solutions that you've crafted with business, you won't have repeat customers. So we'll talk a little bit about how to bring those partners to the table and ensure that you're putting together a really great product, really great solution for business. So we're going to talk about business engagement in 3 phases, and I don't want you to feel like you have to like frantically scribble notes at the end of this call. We've got a toolkit that captures all of this that we're going to get you links to, so you'll be able to access this information again and again. But the 3 phases of business engagement really are around research and preparation. How do you find businesses that you're going to start, reaching out to and working with and prepare for those conversations? What does the initial conversation look like and that early follow-up? And then how do you close the deal? And of course, underlying all of this is really a 4th phase of business engagement, which is the ongoing care and feeding of your sponsors, which is so particularly important where we are right now. I'm going to dive into phase 1. And this is really, again, this is about all the work that you do before you ever start talking to a business to ensure that you are well prepared and that you're going to kick off a really fantastic consultative conversation with that business. So the first thing we want to think about, in this phase, we think about recognizing pain points that apprenticeship is good at addressing and sort of how to spot them out in the labor market information and in your conversations and scans of your economy. We talk about using research to identify those businesses and then some helpful tools for preparing for your first conversation. So Jerry, let me start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of challenges that businesses face that you found are really well suited to the apprenticeship solution?
Sure. So again, Jerry Ghazi, and what I've actually gone and started talking with employers, the very first thing I do is try to seek to understand, right? So, and surely to understand those initial challenges that they're facing. And as Gina said, apprenticeship is not some noun. It's not an existing of an end state. It's more about a process of employee development, right? So I've always referred to it as an action verb, and that employers are already doing it. So the first thing I do is scan for who's hiring and how are they hiring, and what skill gaps are they finding, because these job postings, and when you have numerous of them in one given area, will indicate that there's a skills gap, right? So what I do is look for those skills gaps, and amongst either one employer that has many postings for a given occupation or position, and those postings have been open for a long time, or a group of employers. And in Vermont, probably 15 years ago, we saw, newspaper after newspaper back then when they actually advertised the newspaper, CNC machine operators. There weren't enough of them in Vermont. And you saw an ad after an ad, and we recognized that that was a perfect opportunity to create an apprenticeship holder to build the skill set versus buying it, right? Right, and then you also want to start looking at when businesses are posting openings for mid-level occupations, because that means they're actually potentially in the position to bring on new talent to backfill those mid-level positions. So when we look at postings for either managers or supervisors, et cetera, and many of those postings that are placed internally as well as externally may give you kind of an onboarding view into what that employer may be doing for new hires coming in, right? What we've also looked for is the constant one employer being in the paper time and time and time again, or being posted on the web time and time and time again, where they're constantly being posting and reposting the same occupation. And that's really important to look at those kind of trends that you find and then approach those employers, because that's a pain point that they're trying to solve, right? And so another major one is the advancing of technology, right? So we are in a digital transformation. And if anything, this COVID-19 has done is forced businesses to go through a digital transformation of their work processes and their workforce. And so that's a key area where you have upskilling. Someone used it in the chat, the fact that folks are looking now at upskilling. Upskilling is, again, an action verb of taking an individual employee and developing them, which you can put a wrapper around and call it an apprenticeship.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jerry. And Susan, can you talk a little bit about approaches that you use to identify businesses that are having these challenges? Jerry talked a little bit about, scanning the job ads. What are some approaches you take to finding businesses who have the kind of pain points that apprenticeship can work well for?
Well, sure, and thank you. I just want to add a little bit to what Jerry's saying, because he's right on target. That's obviously a real starting point we need to look at. For example, when I even now look at the different states I work with, the first thing I do is look at the job boards, Indeed, Glassdoor, or Monster. I use Indeed only because it's the largest of the three. Then I use a program like Burning Glass that can run all the data for 1 year. And I run it by metropolitan statistical area. So depending on what I want to look at with the state, it gives me a good view for a full year of what has been the job demand here and now. Whereas, realizing it's not a forward look. So now when you look at the economy, I'll be running another scan on a couple of states in May, because there'll be obviously a lot of job shed happening. So the biggest thing I like to do is see what's most in demand, and then those occupations go straight across to the SOC codes, which give me a lot of information quick. You may, like I said, want to run it a couple of times a year very quickly. And for what example, if I were interested in web development in one state, web development in the IT area, in your metropolitan statistical area, for most of you will be up near the top. So that's why I'm just using that one. So if I were looking in San Diego, I would just start writing down some of the company names I'm seeing with those job ads. Then I'd flip over and be looking at the websites of the companies, look at their job descriptions, and then review the descriptions for the skills. I'll be jotting down notes because it helps determine if I'm going to approach them, what are the job task analysis and work processes. You're already beginning to get an idea of the skills asked. And excuse me, the preferred skills, those are the ones generally more difficult, hard to locate. So I put those over another category, but I know which companies are looking for those. So part of it is, this just helps track, what you're learning. You need those job descriptions, and I begin to get an idea of which companies might be good ones to approach. That being said, the other thing I try to look at, why are they advertising consistently? Sometimes they have such a huge job need. Other times they don't perhaps value their employees as much, as evidenced by lower wages than industry standards. So part of it is I try to look for those that I think are better candidates, maybe for apprenticeship at that time. It doesn't mean I wouldn't go back to that company, but it's not the first company that I start with. It's a good candidate for apprenticeship.
Thanks, Susan. And I like that I really appreciate you getting that down to brass tacks for us, and the approach that you take, and also giving us a sense of how you look for company culture, kind of reading between the lines on company culture, as well as pain points and what's really driving that demand that you're seeing. Another really important work to do here in this phase before going out to talk to businesses is to understand what value you can bring to business through apprenticeship. So, before you start talking to a business, you want to know both the inherent value of apprenticeship as well as any additional resources that you can bring to the table because of programs or grants or activities available in your state. Wendy, can you talk a little bit about what you need to know in order to understand that ROI for apprenticeship offers to business in a state or a local area?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Wendy Furs again. I am a senior consultant at Mayor, and really excited to join this boot camp today. When it comes to speaking with businesses, it's just so important to be prepared to walk in their shoes and to listen through their eyes. And so when we talk about businesses thinking about apprenticeship as a workforce development strategy, again, they do workforce development every day. They post jobs and they interview and they hire. And so why this particular strategy, and how does it affect the return on investment? They're very familiar with their existing strategies, and they're really looking to understand the difference. And it's so important to really be able to articulate the value that's inherent in the structure of the registered apprenticeship program itself. We may all get so close to it, we forget that it has inherent value. So, take the time to remind yourself that it has a stepped up wage involved. It does have intense increased retention rates. It does provide a framework that's repeatable and organized, and that those things can be extremely valuable as a workforce development strategy for an organization. And then, as Gina mentioned, on top of that, your state or region may have a whole host of other value adds to this that the business may not understand even at all. Financial, tax incentives, programs, technical assistance, recruiting, really flesh out the value that this can bring them and be prepared to share that with them so that they fully appreciate the value they can get through registered apprenticeship.
Thanks, Wendy. And Brenda's in the chat talking about speaking to their bottom line and what training an apprentice saves the company. And gathering this information that we're talking about here is what's going to allow you to do that. So, you can run an ROI based on just what's baked into a registered apprenticeship program, but then you may be able to enhance that ROI if you know that you've got some resources that let you cover the cost of related technical instruction, or if you know that there's a tax credit in your state, or that there's some other resources that you might be able to provide. So in this phase, you're gathering this information to help you build your package. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Oh, I want to say Roy's got a question here. So what about jobs that we might not even know about are going to be needed post-COVID? How to start thinking about those. And, that's a great point too, Roy. The currently apprenticeable occupations may not even contemplate the direction that our economy is going. So something to think about that as well. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving to our next phase, which is phase 2, about building those relationships. You've done that research. You've identified specific businesses who are having pain points for which apprenticeship is a good solution. You've gone in and educated yourself about those businesses. You know what they do. You know their language. You know the ins and outs of the occupation. You've tracked you've tracked what's happening on the job boards with that business. You're ready to go and have a good listening conversation with business. And Jerry's going to talk us through a process that he really likes to use for that. So Jerry, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thank you, Gina. So the key thing is to really learn and do everything you can to study that employer that you're going to make that sales call with before you actually show up, right? So you're going to seek to understand, and the best way of doing that is the web, right? Learn as much about the employer and about the individuals you're going to be speaking with before you make that sales call. So what I like to do is go to the employer website. I like to look at these job openings. I like to download a couple of job openings. I like to try to read them from not only a perspective of what the responsibilities of each of them are, but also what technologies they're using. So if I go in there, I can actually speak their language with them, right? So that when they start describing something, I can ask probative questions about what's really needed and what we can do. And I don't mention the word apprenticeship. On all those initial calls, it's usually I talk about a workforce development solution and try to identify each and every one of those significant pain points that the employers are feeling. And after I scan those websites, and if I'm going to do maybe a multi-employer possession, so we're actually going to have a presentation where there'll be a group of employers, I try to look at each and every one of those employers' websites to gather the common job descriptions together and understand the technologies that they're using, the education that they require for the occupations or the positions they're posting, and also the work processes. Because what I want to do is go in there and not have a fixed solution. I don't want to start with a solution. I want to start with a problem statement. And there's so many different aspects that a registered apprenticeship kind of encompasses in an employee development model, right? The recruitment and hiring, the assessment process, the onboarding, the education process, the mentoring process that happens anyway with a workforce development solution, right? And so what I want to do is try to understand as much as I can during that first call what they're facing in terms of pain points in each one. And I don't want to assume that there's a pain point. Like, for instance, if they already have an organization within an education organization, I don't want to assume that I need to bring one to them. I want to seek that out during those initial calls. So again, after learning as much as I can from the web, I want to go in there and start learning more from the employer, but being able to speak their language, right? So basically what I try to do is, and I want to start at the highest level, which is I like to talk about the 5 components of an apprenticeship, right? And these are the 5 standard components that in every registered apprenticeship program, right? There is business involvement, and what that means to me is that there's employment, that businesses are in the process of hiring or upskilling. So that employment could be a new employee coming in or an incumbent employee being upskilled. That's the first element of a registered apprenticeship. You have to have an employer. Second, there's the related instruction. So you have this new individual, they're going to enter an apprenticeship. You want to be able to tie some educational event to that individual's progression through the apprenticeship, and it could be front-loaded, it could be throughout it, but there's education that's happening, right? The third is structured on-the-job learning, which is the third component of a registered apprenticeship, which is the work process schedule we all know about, right? That we're actually going in and helping an employer take their job positions, looking at all the responsibilities, and creating basically a works process schedule from that, right? And then the fourth element is rewards for skills gains, right? So there's some type of wage schedule associated with an apprenticeship that each and every employer lays out and maps. They're already doing that as well. And then finally, there's a national credential, right? So these are the 5 elements that happen within a registered apprenticeship program. And what I want to show you is that business is already doing all of these. And that's why there's no need to even mention apprenticeship when you actually start your conversations with employers. And what you're doing is I try to go in and try to understand for each of those elements, not even mentioning an apprenticeship, where the employer sits. So the first thing I look at is the business hiring. Are they upskilling, right? Do they have a promotion process where they take one individual in one level and bring them up to another level? To me, that's the first element, that they are developing their employees, right? So I know that there's a developmental aspect of this employer's culture that is at play that I could wrap an apprenticeship around, right? Then the next thing is when they onboard someone new, or they take someone that's an existing employee and put them into a new position, what type of education do they provide? What type of onboarding do they do? You know, all employers, right, when they bring a new person on, they don't just throw them on the floor after they hire them. They basically do their own analysis of the skills gap, right? This person has a resume, they match it against the job description, and if there's a gap, they need to fill that gap. And they fill it with 2 things. One is they fill it with education. They may send out a programmer out to take a C++ class. And they may take a CNC machinist and bring in OEM, you know, the manufacturer of the machine to do specific training on it. So employers are constantly building their workforce, new and existing, with some type of education, some type of training. And when I hear about that, I dig deeper into that aspect of it. And what I do is I actually start asking the employers about, do they have internal training departments? Is that a pain point for them? Is it difficult for them to find the education they need to just bring their employees up to speed? The next element is normally employers, when they bring someone on, they don't just throw them on the floor, but they actually pair them up with someone. So they are actually doing the support of new staff with mentoring. It may be a team leader, a manager, a supervisor, a coach, but there's something in the system that they're actually doing in an employee development process, right? It's a verb, it's an action. And I try to find out that, putting that in my back pocket, say, great, they have that element. And then as people progress in the normal employee development, I see, well, how do you do wages? How do you actually do increases? Do you have merit-based wages? Do you have annual wages? So I start figuring out in my own mind what that wage schedule would look like in an apprenticeship. And then finally, I asked, how do people get promoted? How do they move from one level to the next? What happens in that process? Do they change titles? Do they change levels, et cetera? Because to me, they're actually doing that 5th element of a registered apprenticeship, which is giving a person a new title, right? They may have been a senior, associate programmer and moved to a senior level. And to me, it's a promoting within. They're moving people up. If they're developing their employees, then in essence, they're doing an apprenticeship. And what I want to do is try to wrap apprenticeship around it. And so when I have those first conversations, what I try to do is engage the employer, right, in those conversations to seek to understand their pain points without bringing up apprenticeship. And I think someone in the chat said, you need to speak the language of the employer, right? For us on this phone, right, that are entrenched in apprenticeship, we use terms like outreach and selection, where employers use recruitment and interviewing, right? We talk about work processes and competencies, right? For an employer, you need to speak about their job descriptions, right? What are the responsibilities on that job description? right? When we talk about related technical instruction, we sometimes use the abbreviation RTI. That will mean nothing to an employer. For an employer's perspective, we talk about training, internal and external, right? Do you have your own training department? Do you go outside to an education provider, right? When you onboard something, what education do they go through, right? So you start using their language to describe those elements, right? Again, on-the-job learning, the OJL, the work processes, and the performance, right? The mentoring. Employers look at supervision of their employees, right? They look at their job descriptions and their performance reviews. So I dig into that with them. How are your performance reviews structured? Are they competency-based? Do you only give merit-based increases? Do you give time-based increases? That's going to help me. And the next step, which is identifying the wage schedules, right? So with a merit-based system, you know, you may want to move to a competency-based apprenticeship, but you don't mention that. But you're making tick marks in your own mind about, okay, how do I want to structure a solution called apprenticeship, which is an employee development solution for this employer, by ferrying it out using their language, their terminology to bring it to fruition. And then completion, a certificate of completion, right? So apprenticeship is going to result in that, but it's also going to result in a title change, in a position change. So I talk about that. You know, and the first thing I do is I look at all the job descriptions that they have and the leveling. And I ask them, how long does it take for a person to move from level 1 to level 2 or level 2 to level 3? And when they describe that, I'm visualizing an apprenticeship and stackable apprenticeships even for that employer without even mentioning the word apprenticeship. So the key is to speak their language, right? The next aspect of it is really understanding what they're offering the businesses, right? And what I want to do is we actually captured the slide once before. We talked a little about the value add. And one of the things I want to bring up on this particular slide is a comparison of the traditional model versus the RA model. What do they traditionally do in hiring versus what they do in bringing a hiring of a cohort or a group of individual registered apprentices, and the difference in the value proposition that that brings. So ROI is really, ROI is a return on the investment in registered apprenticeship, but there's also a comparison of, if you did it the traditional way, what is it costing you, right? If you do it through a registered apprenticeship, what's it costing you, and what is that delta between the two? And I think that's really important. And finally, and the most important thing is the follow-up, right? So the key aspect is before you leave that first meeting, you did a lot of understanding, you did a lot of listening, you identified the pain points, but you want to put a hook in for them to ask you to come back, right? You want to talk about and reiterate back to them potential solutions for how you can help solve some of those pain points without even mentioning apprenticeship, right? Potential solutions for how you can help them with their hiring and recruitment, for onboarding, for training, for mentoring. So maybe there's incentives that you can bring to the table, something to get them hooked so that they'll want to hear your next sales call, right? And again, understand there's going to be multiple sales calls with different audiences. Your first audience may be with HR, your second audience may be with operations. The HR presentation that you make will be very different than the one to operations. And again, create an incentive for them to meet with you again. That's the biggest thing. They leave excited, you're hearing it in their voice, but you need to create a process for which they will follow up with you. Back to you.
Thank you, Jerry. That was fantastic. And a question came in while you were talking from Glenn. I think it would be helpful if you could give a quick answer. When you make that initial outreach to a business, the one that you use to get them to agree to talk to you, how do you describe the function or the reasoning for the call?
Right. So normally what I will do for when I'm introducing on a cold call to an employer is like I will reference something that I saw up there. I'll introduce myself. I'll talk a little bit about their company. I was on your website, and I noticed you have X, Y, and Z openings. And I'm part of an organization that is in the business of helping employers fill those openings, because the last thing you want to do is have an open rec, right? Because somewhere along the pathway of your revenue model, that open rec is preventing you from fulfilling your mission, right? So I try to bring in their problems that I see based on even postings, like Susan mentioned, right? All the job postings, right, on websites, et cetera. You really want to understand, that pain point, and that's how I introduce myself, right? So I want to help bring a solution to them by understanding and reiterating to them that I understand where they're at and could offer potential solutions for helping them in the different aspects.
Great, thank you, Jerry. We're going to keep moving. Also want to make sure that we get to your questions. So please, in the chat, if you've got questions that you're bringing to today's conversation, questions about what we've talked about already, or questions about things that happen a little bit later in the business engagement work, please don't hesitate to type those in. Susan, could you talk a little bit? Building trust is so critical in this stage of business engagement. Jerry talked about how to leave the door open and have a hook in for a second conversation, but this trust building work is going to take place over probably several conversations. And Susan, can you talk a little bit about how you do that work? You might need to go off mute, Susan.
Excuse me, I was muted there for a minute. Yes, I think what Jerry's saying is right on target, and how you build trust is really, in my opinion, from going from that conversation to what you told them that you might be able to bring back and do. What that is saying, if you said I was going to bring something back in a certain time or place or whatever I was going to do, I make sure I get it there on time, or even before the projected due date, so that they know that I'm bringing it, and when I bring it, it's going to be high quality, as high quality as I can get at that time. They already have a perception of public, whether it's a workforce board or a college or other kinds of places. So it's even more important that we do really good work that we bring forward. One of the things too, in providing, examples of other businesses, I like to also not only use local businesses within a state or a metropolitan statistical area that are, have this kind of apprenticeship program, something similar they can relate to, but also a national model. That always helps them see what's happening locally as well as nationally. I like to do, as far as opportunities to connect with peers using apprenticeship, introductory emails. I ask them if they would be open to it. Would they like for me to arrange it? In other words, I try to make it easy for them, not just say, Bill Jones has a similar program. You'd probably love to talk to him. I like to say, can I set up a conference call that we could talk about it, or both of you could talk about it, however they want to arrange that meeting. For small companies, a lot of times I used to use business breakfasts and have them, and maybe invite 30 or 40 companies that maybe are looking at tool and die and need that. So I try to look at ways to connect that fit for that particular business. And in creating an apprenticeship solution proposal, I just do a brief document with key steps and timelines to get us started. I don't like to overwhelm them or, moving forward. And then a rough, return on investment calculations. You can use models from, like, I know Michigan has one, several other states do. But I think back to a little bit of what Brenda was showing in the chat box. It's like, the estimated cost of the advertising they're doing each year for the position. It's also, many of them have staffing firms. A lot of those staffing firms have, $3,000, $5,000 costs associated for each apprentice. So each time there's turnover, that's a lot of money they're spending. So part of all of that goes in a model just to show them, it really is a way to save money long term. So those are the key things I try to look at when we're building trust, and not oversell it, but let them know we're going to produce what we said we produce, and always get it on time.
That's great, Susan. And for all of you who are listening in, maybe you're thinking of, what you do to build trust in building that relationship with business. So chime in the chat. Let your peers know the approaches that you take. What's worked for you in building that relationship, building a strong foundation of confidence in the apprenticeship model and interest in moving forward and building a solution within a particular employer or business. We're going to move on now into phase 3. And if it feels like we're moving a little fast, we want to give you a tour of these tools, these processes, these approaches. Your coach is going to help you unpack these and apply them to the specific work that you're doing today and that you anticipate doing in the future. So know that you have a lot more time to really work with these approaches. When we think of phase 3, phase 1, before you start talking to the business. Phase 2 are those initial conversations, understanding, listening, learning their culture, developing in your mind that apprenticeship solution and getting to a place where you can have that conversation and begin growing their comfort with and familiar with an apprenticeship type solution. And here we are in phase 3, which is getting to commitment. So how do you get from there to signed standards? And what are some of the challenges that you might encounter in this third phase and some approaches to some of those challenges? So what we think of when we think about this phase is, addressing concerns, hearing some of those like common misunderstandings about apprenticeship or common potential barriers to apprenticeship and how to address those. We think about how to build organizational buy-in. Jerry alluded, maybe you had a great conversation with HR, but if you don't have the buy-in of the, frontline supervisors and managers, the program might not work. So how do you get those right conversations to the table? And then partners, how do you build that solution? If you are working with a business where one of the really attractive pieces to them about apprenticeship is potential recruitment, well, who's doing that recruitment and screening for you as part of your solution? Is it the local workforce board? Do you have them at the table? So Wendy, can you talk about, some of the strategies that that you're aware with that have worked for you about, how do you get to that commitment? What does a business need to hear? When you think about working with a business, how do you help them navigate this phase?
Yeah, definitely. And truly, it's building on everything we've already heard spoken about in phase 1 and phase 2 so far, being so prepared and understanding that they want to see the value. They do need to calculate a return on investment. They do need to have the capacity and the capacity within their company to do this needs to understand apprenticeship. And just really, again, being in their shoes and understanding to get to commitment isn't one person's decision usually. It's multiple people's decision. And as this idea gets closer to commitment, more people's opinions and questions are coming up. So you may have felt like you addressed them already in your conversations, but you have to realize now other people might be chiming in and the person you're speaking with might be representing folks that you haven't even yet met. And so to continue to understand that they really want to make sure this is the right solution for them, that a lot is on the line for them to put. This is not a short-term commitment for a company of any size, honestly. And many of them in their mind move into something like this in kind of a trial mindset, and are really looking to understand the measurements of success and how they can continue to justify the investment. For them, it's not a one-time, I did it and now I have apprenticeship forever. It's a continual process to get this program and keep this program and grow this program. And so just understanding those perspectives is really important. There are these myths to address, and I just want to share one of my favorite ones I heard from a company once. One of the myths is, I'm going to train all these people and they're just going to leave after they're done with their apprenticeship. And my favorite is an employer that said, well, I'm not so worried about training them and them leaving. I'm really worried about not training them and them staying. So I just leave that with you to say, really think about innovative ways to help the organization understand and address their concerns. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Wendy. I love that story. And the toolkit that we're going to link you to in a minute, there's a lot of places you can go to get some support around how to tackle some of the challenges or concerns that might come up. The toolkit that we're going to link you to has 6 of kind of the most common and some ways that you can work with a business who's, having those concerns. We want to leave some time for questions, so I hope you're thinking about some questions. Now can be a time for you to think, raise specifically how you might, apply some of what you're learning to some specific work you have going on. While we're having you start to maybe type some of those questions into the chat, I just want to turn over to Susan one more time. Just talk about what it looks like to close the deal. what are some of those steps? What are those things that are happening there at the tail end as we're working to close the deal with a business?
Sure. Glad to do so. Closing the deal, I think as we work with these companies, I've always tended to work as if I worked for the company and with the company when I'm doing this. So we've built trust, we've helped with much of the work, because this is a one-time putting together of an apprenticeship program for most companies. Some have more, but it's a lot of strange language, documents, and other things. And we're the shepherd, I think, to lead them through this whole part, and actually many times do the work. They're more, in my opinion, on the approval end of it and working to work hand in glove and deciding what they want in and what they want out. But I always think, in closing it, if we brought every step of this process in an easy way to them, in easy language, it makes it so much easier for them to be able to move to the next step. So I like them to think of being a support member of their company team, and that always helps in getting that commitment. On any of them, it's like working through the work process and related instruction. I'm always used to doing most of that initial work with the company, looking and adding things to it and making it the way they want it to be. But most of them I've found really don't want to start from the very beginning and try to figure out, is this going to be the right way to do it, and is it good enough? And yes, I try to show them the value that each one of these things is going to bring to their company. And I talked to them a little bit here on closing the deal, and even before, throughout the process, how the apprenticeship will provide a transfer of the company-specific knowledge and the skills to the next generation of workers. It really is a large part of their knowledge management system or repository for the company. So if we've done all of those things, then it really is pretty easy. There's no surprises at the time for them to sign the piece of paper. So that's how I usually bring them through a process. And I forgot the last one I wanted to talk about for a second. Always the alternative in terms of an intermediary, if they don't want to do it themselves. And even if they do, a lot of times you can help them at the beginning when they're hiring of, how do they get that into the system, and what help do they need with the input of those documents for the new apprentices into Rapids. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much to all three of you for sort of sharing your expertise and walking through these approaches. Of course, there are more, and we'll unpack more of that along the way in our work with you. I promised you that I would link you to some tools that support what we're talking about today. So you can see on your screen here, the resource guide, A Targeted Approach to Business Engagement, goes a little bit deeper into these three phases and talks a little bit more depth about some of the approaches that we've talked about today. Lisa, you asked about if there's documents that offer a response to typical objections or misconceptions raised by employers. So that resource guide has responses to 6. We can also get out to you, and Lily can help me make sure this happens. There are some other documents DOL has provided that talk about some of the other myths, so we can get some of those over to you. But why don't you just go ahead and click on one of the links that's here on the screen now. Can you do that? I'm checking to see if you can do that. Or you can download the presentation, and we'll also email these to you. Yeah, you can click on these hyperlinks so that you can download them. I like this Talking to Business. It's just a 2-pager that's just the glossary of apprenticeship to business speak. And then apprenticeship business engagement strategies in action are like some mini case studies of states and local areas who have used these approaches and the impact that it had. We have some time for questions, and I see some great ones are coming in the chat. If you have others, toss them into this chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Let me just take a minute to breathe and take a look at your questions. So Rebecca, you're talking about how in South Dakota, the one-stop office staff are kind of lacking confidence in doing this kind of business engagement, and especially in discussing apprenticeships, and sort of how might you assist, what are some things you might do in building their confidence? Do any of our coaches want to speak to that?
I'd be happy to. This is Jerry, and this has happened throughout many workforce development boards for folks that are new to selling. And what you want them to do is identify themselves in some historical perspective that they were once an apprentice, unregistered, but an apprentice. And that really helps people personalize what you're really trying to sell an employer on, right? That workforce development model, that employee development model. And for them to look at themselves, and we've had CEOs get up in front of large groups of people and say, in 3 times in my career, I was an apprentice, not registered, but I went through all the elements that we're describing today. And that's why we as an organization are embracing this, because I truly believe in employee development. I think what scares a lot of folks away is the fact that apprenticeship is looked at as a noun, a concrete set of things, versus an action verb, which is just an employee development. And every one of us has been through that. I have been through 4 or 5 apprenticeships myself, all unregistered, from high school to college and to beyond in my careers, in different careers, having had to go out and get education, had to go out and be mentored by folks, grew through steps within a leveling system, and then eventually getting promoted to go to the next level.
Thanks, Jerry. I think sometimes just that little sort of shift in helping people connect with something that might otherwise feel technical and unfamiliar is such an important part of opening them up to learning. And Rebecca, another thing that many states do is really extensive training for their one-stop staff. So if they are an important part of your business engagement and outreach strategy for apprenticeship, states like Michigan and Colorado and Idaho and many others, Iowa have just really rolled up their sleeves and done a lot of work, some of which looks a lot like this boot camp, or at least the component that we're doing together today, to really help people build this confidence and to practice, sometimes in simulations, to practice having these conversations with business. I can see a couple other people are chiming in with some questions. In the meantime, Kathy Dickinson has a question about sort of how to support, how to like mentor an employer, how to help them ensure that the experience is good for their apprentices, particularly if they're new to it. Anyone have some thoughts about how to help an employer be an effective sponsor in sort of the first cycle of their apprenticeship program?
This is Jerry again. I think Brenda in the chat hit it right on. If you think about it, many times when people are new to apprenticeship, they're new to employee development. They really have never taken on new individuals that weren't already skilled and brought them through a process. And the number one thing that Brenda stated is you have to engage with mentors and have really good mentors that keep that apprentice engaged, right? Most important thing that an apprenticeship offers is a plan, a structure. You have a related technical instruction schedule of courses, a learning plan for that individual, and then you have a coach alongside. So by identifying and helping employers pick out good mentors, right? Ones that will be effective, regardless of whether an apprenticeship program is in play or not, will make all the difference in the world for those that are new to it in employee development and keeping those individuals in the process of being developed, engaged every step of the way.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And there are some resources. Again, I'll make sure through Lily that we get this out to you. There are a few toolkits about how to do mentor training in your state, or how to support new sponsors and helping them prepare their mentors to play this role if that's a piece of their business culture that they are interested in strengthening. So we'll make sure to get that out to you as well. And I know there are a number of states that really, as part of kind of increasing their apprenticeship capacity, are doing more sort of checking in with new sponsors and supporting them in navigating that first year and making it successful. Brenda's got some good ideas here in the chat too. Brenda, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We super appreciate it. Kathleen's asking, how would I find apprenticeship models in other states that might be a good resource for an industry in our state? So if you are looking to start a new program and maybe working with an industry, where it's the first model in your state. Susan, could you speak a little bit to that? And maybe this will be our last question and then we'll wrap up.
Sure.
Sort of how do you connect someone to a business if they're the first business in the state to do this type of registered apprenticeship?
Well, I think first gets back to knowing what do they really want to accomplish and do. And I think it's easy enough to at least go in and look at, if I were a business development person there, looking at some other state or calling over and finding out what's a good model the other states know that's, you know, been used, that's effective. I think it's an easy thing to do once, you know, you look at some other 2 or 3 models and see what fits best for them. You can then show them examples and work it through and see what they like, what they're more in tune with. Just because it's popular somewhere else may not necessarily be a fit there, but at least you can bring them some things to look at and decide.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And, you know, building on that, Kathleen, depending on the industry sector, there's been some really good work happening across the country to pull together models and examples and programs. And the Department of Labor has funded intermediary organizations, and they can be a great source of this. So like if you're working in advanced manufacturing, Jobs for the Future is the intermediary, passports, transports for the shipping sector, HCAP in the healthcare sector. There's organizations that are out there doing this work all across the country, and they can be a great source of finding a good business to lift up as a model or some examples. I know folks have to go, so we're going to wrap up. I want to be respectful of your time. Just a couple quick things. So wrap up the next steps. If you haven't signed up for your coaching session, do that. That's Florida, Kentucky, Massachusetts, South Dakota, and Vermont. So go to your email, look for a message from me, Gina Wells, follow the link and register for your coaching time. And I'll also follow up with you tomorrow about that. Think about the specific challenge you want to talk to your coach about. You can best utilize your time with your coach when you come on and are able to say, I want to work with you on my plan to work with the IT sector in the state of Oregon and really expand the work that we're doing there. Or I've been trying to work with this one business for 6 months and we had 2 good conversations and they won't call me back. What could I do next? Or my boss told me I have to start a program in the biotech sector, help. Think about what that opening problem space is that you want to tackle with your coach, and then plan on doing some homework between calls so that you can really you know, put some of this to action and bring that into your second coaching call. I want to thank you all for being so lively in the chat, for engaging with us. We have enjoyed this time, and I know I speak for all the coaches and I say we're really looking forward to digging in with you and working with you on all of this and getting to know you better along the way. So thanks so much. This is just the beginning, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Bye, everybody. And thank you so much to our coaches for being on. Take care.
Take care now. Thank you.